Kaela Mara hated the way quiet turned into spectacle. The transfer shuttle rotated slowly, bringing the Alliance Citadel orbital ring into full view through the wide forward pane. It was less a station and more a halo of architecture, bands of silver, glass, and pale gold plating wrapped around the planet like someone had tried to give Earth a crown and missed by a few thousand kilometers. Most of the passengers pressed toward the viewport. Some extended ocular tendrils, others adjusted HoloLenses or shifted entire bodies of liquid crystal to get a better angle. Kaela stayed in her seat, boots magnet-locked to the floor, hands resting loosely on her knees. She watched the ring only in its reflection on the dark shuttle hull. "She doesn't even look impressed," a voice hissed in Galactic Standard. Another answered with a dry clicking laugh. "Death World species have impaired fear responses. That's why they're dangerous." Kaela didn't turn. She knew enough about first contact channels to recognize the tone, academic, amused, certain it was safe to speak about her like she was a documentary subject with headphones on. The shuttle AI cut in over the low murmur. "Approach vector confirmed. Please remain secured. Gravity differential in 5, 4. Her stomach lifted for a second as the shuttle's artificial gravity synced to the ring's standard. Lighter than home. Always lighter. She rolled her shoulders once, as if shrugging off a jacket, then let them fall back into place. "Human," someone nearer said. "You're the Earth transfer, yes?" She glanced sideways. The speaker was a tall, narrow being whose skin refracted light in shifting prism colors, eyes like faceted glass. Thin metal bands circled each wrist, humming faintly with some internal resonance. "Yes," Kaela said. "Kaela Mara. You don't seem nervous," it observed. "I don't see any reason to be," she answered. The being tilted its head slightly. "The tribunal exams are broadcast to 93 systems. Many careers fall apart on that platform." "I don't have a career here," she said. "I have one exam. Then I go home." There was a small pause. The prismed alien's eyes brightened, as if cataloging her reply for later discussion. "Interesting," it murmured. "Very interesting." The shuttle docked with a gentle jolt. The main doors hissed as pressure equalized, then slid aside. Noise from the ring washed in, layered announcements, the thrum of distant engines, the overlapping languages of hundreds of species passing through the transfer hub. Kaela released her boots, stood, and shouldered the small pack that held everything the tribunal allowed her to bring: one uniform, a plain datapad, a hard copy of Earth's basic treaty articles. The rest, tools, implants, augmentary lenses, remained on the planet. Human body only. That had been part of the point. The air inside the Citadel had a filtered, slightly metallic taste, like breathing inside an instrument. The docking corridor opened into the main arrival concourse, a hollow cylinder lined with platforms, shops, and processing stations spiraling around a central shaft. Transparent steel panels offered glimpses of the planet below and the cold web of satellites above. "Transfer candidates, follow the blue vector," a ceiling-mounted holo announced in accented standard. Dotted arrows appeared on the floor, pulsing toward a set of security arches. Kaela walked, pace even and unhurried, letting the flow carry her. Conversation eddied as she passed. "That's the Earth one. Look at the density profile, those muscles are real. Did they actually classify that world at D7? That's barely habitable. I read the report. Seas that kill you, storms that rewrite coastlines, and they put children there on purpose." She caught fragments the way she used to catch leaves in the river as a kid, let them drift by, note their shape, let them go. At the security arches, a cluster of tribunal aides waited, 3 slender Kethri with translucent skin, and a stocky, furred being whose badge translated as Logistics Director Vern. The Kethri carried scan wands. Vern held a slate and looked as if he'd been forced into a clean uniform after losing an argument about comfortable clothing. He checked the slate, then looked up at her. "Kaela Mara of Earth?" "Yes. Here for provisional academic evaluation with the Interstellar Tribunal." "If that's what it's called up here, yes." One of the Kethri twitched at her tone, but said nothing. Vern snorted softly, almost amused. We are on a tight schedule. Please step through the field. Kaela did. A soft sheet of light washed over her body, humming around bones and blood, mapping everything it found. The scanner chimed twice, once for mass density, once for neural potential. The K3 holding the wand reeled back half a step, pupils dilating. Is there a problem? Kaela asked. No prohibited augmentations, the aide said after a moment, voice a little thin. Biological readings are within acceptable variance. Variance, one of the others repeated under its breath. Vern's gaze lingered on the numbers floating above the slate. You're heavy, he observed. Earth standard, Kaela said. He shook his head. Not here, you're not. He gestured toward a set of lifts. Tribunal Sector. The Arbiter wants you on staging before the preliminary briefing finishes. The audience loves a visual. I thought this was an exam, not a show, she said. Up here, it's both, Vern replied. You're late to the politics, I'm afraid. The lift doors opened into a quieter corridor lined with viewing windows. Through them, Kaela could see parts of the ring she hadn't glimpsed from space, training arenas, rows of lecture chambers, a long hall where candidates in bright uniforms walked in rigid formation, watched by supervisors with datapads and expressionless faces. They passed a transparent wall looking down into the tribunal amphitheater. It took Kaela a second to realize the curve below wasn't part of the station's hull but the tiered seating of a massive chamber. Rows upon rows of beings, arranged like a rising wave, all facing the central dais. At the center, a single empty platform waited under a cluster of hovering cameras. Vern slowed, padding closer to the glass. That, he said, is where you'll stand. Kaela took it in without quickening her breathing. The scale registered, but it didn't reach whatever part of her would normally shake. It reminded her of the dried-out crater arenas back home where storms had carved amphitheaters into rock. Different materials, same shape. How many? She asked. In person? Vern scratched at his jaw. Just over 1 million, by last count. Broadcast, he tapped his slate and a number flickered, then crawled upward. 93 planetary grids signed on. Several military networks piggybacking. Overactive press feeds. Plenty of bored citizens. That's a lot of people watching someone answer questions, Kaela said. No one tunes in to see questions, Vern said. They tune in to see someone fail them. He shrugged when she looked at him. Most species crack under a full-phase probe. Makes for decent drama. She held his gaze. And if they don't? He hesitated, considering her. Then the commentators complain it was boring, and the analysts argue about what went wrong with the protocol. Either way, someone gets blamed. They left the window and continued toward a staging chamber off the main hall. Inside, a medtech drone scanned Kaela's vitals with quick, impersonal precision. A small table held a glass of water and nothing else. Hydrate, the drone chirped. Orbital humidity is lower than your reported home environment. Kaela drank. The water tasted as processed as the air, but it was clean, and that was enough. A narrow door at the far end slid open, admitting a tall figure in a dark mantle threaded with shifting blue lines. The fabric seemed to move a half-second slower than its wearer, as if attached to a different rhythm. Candidate Mara, he said. His voice carried the effortless authority of someone who had never needed to raise it. Eyes like polished stone, thin mouth, long fingers clasped behind his back. Kaela recognized his face from the briefing packet she'd been sent months ago. Arbiter Zyrek, she replied. You familiarized yourself with tribunal procedures, he asked. Yes. She didn't add several times. The data packet had been concise, she liked concise. You understand that your responses today will contribute to the Alliance's risk model for your entire species. Yes, she said. I read that part a few times. He studied her, perhaps expecting some sign of strain. Her pulse stayed low. He shifted his weight instead, the mantle flickering as it adjusted. Most candidates exhibit elevated cortisol markers at this point, he observed. Most candidates aren't from Earth, Kaela said. His lips quirked in something that might have been the beginning of a smile, or the ghost of one he'd once practiced. Death world humor. Baseline observation, she corrected. Nothing funny about it. He walked a slow circle around her, as if evaluating the construction of a new piece of equipment. You are aware that our interrogation protocols are considered intense? Yes. If at any point you wish to withdraw. I didn't come all this way to walk out before starting, Kaela said, more sharply than she'd planned. I came to complete an evaluation. Then I go home. Zyrek stopped in front of her again. Confident. Practical, she replied. Their eyes met, and for a moment the noise of the ring felt very far away. Very well, Kaela Mara of Earth, he said at last. We begin in 12 minutes. Broadcasting will commence 60 seconds before Phase 1. He turned toward the door, mantle trailing like a slice of midnight. At the threshold, he paused without facing her. Everything you are, he said quietly, will be visible to the galaxy. Kaela looked at her reflection in the metal wall, short hair, steady gaze, uniform pressed with patient care. Not imposing. Not terrifying. Just human. Good, she said. Then they can see it properly. The door slid shut behind him. Kaela sat on the edge of the staging room bench and rested her elbows on her knees. She wasn't thinking about the million bodies in the amphitheater or the grids out there in black space. She thought of her mother's weathered hands packing the treaty hard copy, of the afternoon light over the cracked riverbed, of the way gravity on Earth pressed you into honesty whether you wanted it or not. 12 minutes. She stood when the countdown hit 1, adjusted her collar once, and stepped toward the door that would open onto the tribunal platform and a universe waiting to watch her break. The amphitheater of the ring was never fully silent, even when no one spoke. It breathed on its own, pressure doors cycling kilometers away, data conduits ticking like distant rain, broadcast relays whispering carrier waves and subaudible registers. But when the neural bands touched Kaela's skull, the chamber found a new kind of stillness, an anticipatory hush that rippled outward like a tide pulling back before a storm. The interrogation rig, a coiling rack of tribunal standard probe loops, hovered above a raised plinth at the center of the hall. Its manufactured mind link was calibrated to the neurochemical limits defined by the Dirac cortex scale, species raised in low gravity, fragile atmospheres, and curated schooling systems where adversity was a controlled variable rather than a lived condition. Instruments were never ominous to those who understood them. But to those who intended them to intimidate, they became weapons regardless of shape. Zyrek thought of it as both. Kaela thought of it as wires. Seated high above the dais, behind a semi-transparent sovereign barrier, the logistics director Vern monitored the telemetry, flanked by 2 medtechs from Kethri Diagnostics cast. The furred director's ears flattened as readouts flared across his slate. You sure this is safe? Vern asked one of the Kethri. It passes safety for all profiled minds at 0.4 G upbringing, the Kethri replied, tendrils curling defensively with a faint shimmer. Humans are unprofiled at scale. That is, the point of the session. Yeah, well, Vern grunted. So is shipbreaking, but we don't put it on live television. The aide ignored the jab and continued cataloging the metrics. The cameras orbiting the amphitheater were not mere recording constructs, but emotion mapping rigs linked into the Hallion Sentiment Auditor, fed into every public grid running the live evaluation. Kaela felt the hum of scrutiny accelerate, not inside her, but around her, like an invisible crowd leaning in, expecting her panic to bloom like a firework. Instead, her inhale pushed airflow through her lungs slowly, metered, deliberate. Her body was not defiant. It was simply unconcerned. At the mid-tier student gallery, a trio of gas-mantled silicon observers, young, mocking, overconfident, drifted forward. She's not trembling, one said with a tonal flutter easily translated as disappointment. Her species is theatrically inert, another quipped. Planet probably already shook it all out of her bones. The third hissed back, eyes narrowing into vapor-thin slits. Good. Makes the neural recoil funnier. Kaela overheard it. It entered her short-term memory, noted for social patterning, and filed away without emotional annotation. She wasn't ignoring them out of discipline. She simply didn't see any predictive value in reacting. A waste of energy, like turning your head every time wind rattled glass. Phase 1 began. The neural bands locked into place with seamless motion, kissed her temples like cold rings of light. The pressure ramp on her cortex climbed, 3%, 10%, 23%, algorithmic spikes sliding upward like a serpent climbing invisible stairs. A mild sting registered, then a deeper press, then the sensation of a mind's perimeter being tapped by a stranger's hand. Kaela closed her eyes for 1 second. Not out of pain, but posture. She had more focus with her eyelids shut. "There it is," one of the silicons whispered. Kaela opened her eyes again. Her gaze was unchanged. The neural bands braced for the first scripted question, funneling every human microexpression into Alliance-scale feeds. But Kaela's mind, conditioned by 1G plus planetary pressure, didn't just push back. It sealed. Her cerebral shielding flared reflexively, a cascade of self-hardening cognition known colloquially on Earth as the dead calm reflex, the same neural conditioning naval pilots experienced when storm-flown waters from the Pacific Black Gyre overloaded simulation fidelity. The interrogation system, built for weaker environmental baselines, buckled against an unprofiled parameter it could not parse. And the grid cut out. Not gradually. Not with error codes. It cut like a sword-severing signal. Across the galaxy, broadcast domes dimmed. Command halls snapped upright. Commentators mid-sentence froze into static. On distant orbital defense posts, entire crews stood rigid, convinced the broadcast annihilation was deliberate psychological warfare. Zyrek cursed under his breath at the dais. "Grid down. Reset. Now," he ordered, voice razor-sharp, though only those nearby heard it locally. Kaela, still linked into a severed relay, opened her eyes slowly. The galaxy did not see her roar. They saw her persist. That persistence was data. 12 minutes of broadcast silence produced 900 million hours of existential overanalysis. Conspiracy spirals ignited. War tribute proposals trended. Entire fleets recalibrated Alliance threat models upward until engineers from the network's central oversight manually reinitialized the dome feed. But the outage wasn't sabotage. It was incompatibility. Kaela's mind had been a weight the system wasn't built to hold. When the grid finally restored itself 17 minutes later, it did so under manual dampening layers routed through the interstellar array coils of the Tribunal Recovery Core. The cameras stabilized. The gallery wasn't laughing anymore. They were asking each other how a system could fail before speaking. "How did she disrupt the relay so fast?" one silicon whispered, confidence evaporating. "She didn't disrupt it," another said, quieter now. "She just was, and the system failed to even ask." A Kethri medtech nearby finally exhaled. Subject biological integrity maintained. Probe pressure levels mislabeled. Human cognition exhibits non-graded saturation resilience. Broadcast array, he glanced at the roof where cameras regained their float path, then added, "We'll need structural restrictions before Phase 2. Kaela stood quietly, one strap still hanging from her temple, interrogation bands slithering back like ashamed eels sinking into rigging channels. Phase 1 was insufficient, a tribunal attendant said, voice thinner now, as if politeness was a new learned shield. Kaela shrugged once. "If you want the truth out of a species raised by gravity, you need to ask a question worth answering," she murmured. Her voice did not boom. That was the boom. Zyrek forced professionalism back into his posture, rising slowly, nodding once to the aides. "Manual questioning only for Phase 2, he ordered. "No full-phase neural ramp until target species cognition is properly mapped. Chamber humidity plus 12%. Gravity threshold plus 20%. Ensure the audience has no reason to misinterpret." The Kethri scribbled on his slate like pen meets battlefield order. Kaela stepped off the plinth and took her seat at the central gallery bench. Not out of being cowed, but because standing was now unnecessary. The cameras followed her. The galaxy media grids followed the cameras. And the watchers realized they weren't witnessing a candidate anymore. They were witnessing a recalibration epic. Far above the amphitheater's central curve, the engineer coordinator of the grid, only known by codename SARE-0, typed the final restoration directive into a humming array labeled in ancient standard as the truth gate override. This broadcast is active again not because the human failed, but because the system learned it could. Kaela's eyes stayed steady. The galaxy stayed tuned. HFY was not a volume. It was consequence plus presence. The lift doors dilated open like petals of steel. Kaela stepped into the prep corridor as if returning to a place she'd once dreamed visited. The hall was narrower than the concourse, but taller than most buildings ever raised on Earth. Panels of frosted white transparent steel diffused the station's light into a soft morning glow. Her boots clicked. Not loud. Not small. Simply there. Above the ceiling, the broadcast was warming up again, now routed through a restricted channel overlay named the Citadel Exam Feed Alpha. No rewound spectators, no recorded commentary, live only. The galaxy was watching, but the system finally understood what load it was carrying. The corridor floor displayed faint blue guiding lines that led to a sealed chamber where Phase 2 would begin. Each line carried microetchings and sovereign glyphs documenting past candidates, their worlds, and their exam results. 3 species logos were engraved at the chamber entrance, one of them belonging to the Intersector Defense Coalition known as the Triad Defense Accord. Excessive ceremony, Kaela thought. But not her job to say so. A med drone hovered ahead, eye glowing amber. "Candidate Mara, please halt for final cortical tracing." "Didn't you do that already?" she asked. The drone hummed, rotating a complete circle around her head. "Initial probe loops were out of variance for your species. This is mere mapping, not interrogation. No pressure ramp. No extraction." Kaela relaxed a fraction of a fraction, micromuscles in her jaw softening. "Fine. Do the map." A lattice of green-white filaments projected from the drone, threading around her skull without touching. It skimmed the edge of thought itself, measuring boundaries like an oceanographer measuring a tide pool rather than a trench. A soft bing registered. Neural architecture confirmed. Manual questioning approved. No invasive Phase 2 escalation advised. The med drone drifted back, as though giving space was now part of its protocol. Kaela continued walking. Ahead, Arbiter Zyrek stood outside the sealed examination gate, mantle shimmering with subdued displacement fields as if the system itself was narrowing his theatrics. He watched her approach, eyes balanced between calculation and wariness to avoid illegal psychological duality, but Kaela had no evidence of his inner emotionality. "Candidate Mara," Zyrek said. "Yes?" "You understand the neural probe blackout was not intentional offense. It was miscalibrated instrumentation." "I didn't assume offense," she replied. "I assumed incompetence." A faint ripple shot down the corridor from a passing cluster of 4 anchor techs, antennae flicking in startled amusement. Zyrek exhaled with a half-chuckle that died before completing syllabic translation into audio. "That answer," Zyrek said, "will trend on analysis grids faster than any shouted claim of dominance." "Not my problem," she said. "I'm not here to trend. I'm here to finish." They reached the sealed gate, everything turning a half-tone quieter, like stepping into new time. The gate itself carried a faint manufacturer's stamp belonging to the old station engineering firm now defunct, so its logos were replaced by persistent matrices known only by system tags. Zyrek gestured to the chamber interior. 1 minute until public broadcast handshake. We interrogate by voice only. No neural ramp until we understand more. Questions will be shaped manually, not scripted. She met his glance. Good. Zyrek paused. If the question is, too small? Kaela looked at him. Then it fails without me lifting a wrist. The Arbiter swallowed whatever telepathic show he once rehearsed, turning toward the gate. The Sovereign door recognized him and unsealed. The door brightness increased by plus 33% to signal live transition readiness. The amphitheater beyond wasn't visible here, but Kaela could feel it like pressure in the air live streaming itself quietly into Alliance sphere visual grids. Zyrek stood straight as he activated his comlink. Citadel Exam Feed Alpha, open evaluation, he announced. The feed handshake echoed across galaxies not by volume, but by distance. Sovereign glyphs across every watching hall activated, carrying the seismic shift of one question's anticipation. Kaela stepped onto the plinth again. The platform beneath her wasn't polished marble this time. The engineers replaced it with an ultra-reactive composite developed by the training grounds of the Nethri homeworld known as the Nethri Forgelands. The material adjusted microgravity by cognitive load, countermeasure for neural rebellion events. The Sovereign audience was behind her now in invisible tears. Zyrek floated forward, dismissing attendance silently with a hand's motion. Not intimidation. Delegation. The chamber dimmed local aurora to avoid spectatorial glare. Then he asked the question worth asking. Kaela Mara of Earth, Zyrek said, voice tightening like steel pulling wire thinner. Define the cornerstone of human deterrence without socio-biological metaphor. She breathed once. Then answered. Consequences quantified faster than most species dare to imagine. The audience in the corridor gallery went still. Even Vern, high above, wasn't monitoring anymore. He was listening. Listening meant humility. Listening meant change. Most Accord worlds prefer dramatic posturing under examination, Zyrek added, testing for variation. Why does Earth reject it? Kaela didn't rush. Rush was words wasted. So she used exactness. Because the galaxy keeps mistaking silence for submission, she said. And Earth treats mistakes as broadcast-worthy lessons. Kaela's reply didn't need added adjectives, the meaning itself carried dramatic effect. Zyrek leaned back half a step. Example? Kaela tapped her pad, recovered earlier in physical hardcopy form via the Orbit Logistics Locker software known as the Earth Treaty Archive 7. The pad blinked. Then broadcast reconnected. Heavy words cut feeds, she murmured, small truths cut careers. Earth sends the small truths. You do understand, the Arbiter said, that the Alliance's perception model has shifted 180 degrees across grids? Shift is fine, Kaela said. I wasn't here to move. I was here to be measured. Then for the first time, he asked the question no species ever asked without noise. What do you fear, Kaela Mara? Not an invasive probe. Not an impossible puzzle. A genuine question. Kaela blinked at him. The question wasn't small. It was the size of a life. That you'll start asking questions so late, she replied, you won't remember when survival stopped being simulation. Not a universal answer. A personal one. The room exhaled as if the air finally remembered to move. You've passed the phase, Zyrek said at last. Kaela nodded once. Then send the auditor home early. I still have shipside paperwork before midday. The cameras floating outside the corridor regained stable float paths without aggression or sudden shame twitching the human operators. Kaela stepped off the plinth as Vern's voice echoed across the quiet corridor, transmitted locally now but captured for public result trending via the Alliance public grid. Phase complete. Human did not break. System learned it was breakable. Kaela passed, not by shouting, but by being a stable, unshakable datum that rebalanced the galaxy's assumptions without fanfare. The Watchers realized something else. HFY didn't need roar. It needed witnesses with questions worth asking. The hallway funneling into the amphitheater's core had been cleared for only one reason. The tribunal technicians needed time to rebuild confidence. The neural rig coils were still cooling after the blackout, vents sighing vapor trails into recycler columns. A million different species had gone from jeering to alert in under a quarter hour, and data boards had spun narratives faster than anyone could speak them aloud. Kaela waited exactly where she was told. Not center stage, yet. Holding room 12B, a reinforced cylinder designed to isolate cognitive spikes. The door sealed behind her with a cat-hunk of pneumatic finality. Walls layered with ceramical composites absorbed resonance, etched through with wave-null geometries invented by the defunct architects of the early Ring Age. Nothing decorative, nothing accidental. Every detail was functional. 2 Kethri attendants observed from behind a one-way pane. Their species evolved in 0.3 G tidal planes where loud conflict was evolutionary waste. They disliked arbiter theatrics, but followed orders like currents follow gravity wells. Attendant 1 murmured, heart rate nominal. Neural perimeter stable. Attendant 2 tapped his console, no amp loaded. No augments detected. Human mind is not broadcasting stress markers. Attendant 1 frowned, a flush of lavender rippling across his translucent cheek. Why is a Death World cadet so calm while isolated? Attendant 2 rolled his bony shoulders. Maybe isolation is quieter than Earth's Monday. Kaela's reflection in the glass wall caught her eye again. Not a mirrored reflection like polished metal, but a refracted watercolor smear of motion capture from a pressure bulkhead moving kilometers away. Even here, the ring hummed like a living thing that didn't breathe. Kaela was allowed to carry one device onto the dais, the 2D schematics of Earth's orbital envoy capsule, stored in the treaty locker of the Tribune's uplink grid. Her role was not to defend Earth. It was to answer. Yet even answering was dangerous when others wanted spectacle. A low-gravity diplomat from the Torlon cluster stood beside Arbiter Zyrek near the gate, spore plume cloak twitching with private contempt. His species spent generations in pressurized cloud habitats where truth was negotiated slowly, rarely questioned directly. Their conversations were symphonies, Earth's were sparks. They expect her cortisol to peak at first question, Diplomat Torlon said. Of course, Zyrek replied, adjusting his mantle and smoothing its gravitic threads more conservatively. And failure cells. The diplomat sniffed. The galaxy saw the broadcast fail first. That is not failure. That is accident. That's the spin you want, Zyrek said. Not the spin the audience invents on its own. Kaela sat on the bench and holding 12B, sipping the regulation water dispensed by a drone permanently humming courtesy humidity. The taste was plain, clean, sterilized of minerals Earth considered baseline. It reminded her vaguely of flashlight rain collected in polymer cups during desert field drills. A med drone hovered near, gentle now, amberite dimmed from interrogation glare. Candidate Mara, final rules clarifications. All second-phase questions will be delivered manually, no neural escalation, no probe loops, no empathic broadcast harness. Your responses will map Alliance Trust Delta and risk modeling only. No theatrics permitted. Kaela blinked at it. Then asked the question and moved the universe forward. I'm not a metaphor. Mapping understood, the drone chirped. Proceeding handshake routing. Beyond the glass, audience commentators were already losing their minds, not cognitively, but socially, emotionally, existentially. Their feeds buzzed like a million beehives run off synchronized predictive embarrassment algorithms. Gate check protocols reinitialized. Majority consensus demanded manual-only Phase 2 interrogation, visual-only broadcast layers isolated to mere witness capture. The sovereign door to the amphitheater unsealed again. Kaela stepped forward. She was the only human in the room, though millions watched through the system of the broadcast channel Citadel Exam Feed Alpha. Corridor chatter flattened the nearer she approached the dais. You sure this composite plinth can handle human cognition? A chief engineer from Saren Orbital Press asked over comms, watching readouts carefully. It passed assembly under 1.6 G, another engineer replied. It's not made to break her. It's made to survive her. Then we'll see, Saren said. The cameras floated forward in a tighter ring. They carried no dramatic musical score this time, only the overlooked baseline hum of recycler thermostats stabilizing cross-species trust protocols. Kaela resumed standing. The dais was large, circular, waiting to host failure or truth depending on who you asked. The plinth was ultra-reactive but cognitively dampened to avoid resonance collapse. It glowed a soft metallic iridescent white, no symbols. No logos. That wasn't ego. It was tact. Kaela stood close enough to see Zyrek's eyes blink exactly twice. His long fingers hovered over a slate that displayed her density profile and baseline mappings etched earlier under spectatorial analysis. His species believed interrogation was the pinnacle of spectacle, but their protocol had failed them seconds before attempting its first question. Phase 2 initiated. He asked the first question not scripted by neural loops but by voice. What is humanity's cornerstone metric for cooperative deterrence? Zyrek said. Kaela answered under 60 seconds of broadcast handshake silence. Silence had density, like moments compared to gravity. You want the short form? Zyrek raised his eyebrows. Short form preferred. No dramatic additive. Kaela answered. Survive the consequence of being wrong. The gallery behind the sovereign pane froze. That answer was sharp enough to carve interest corridors through every planetary grid now listening without bias-laden anticipatory failure metaphors. Zyrek tapped his slate again, evaluating not response flamboyance but response density. Clarify. Kaela exhaled once and said. Earth deterrence scales from singular consequences that rewrite assumptions faster than soft curated minds evolve emotional theatrics. She let the statement sit local, not universal, and added simply, smug gets reset by reality, not metaphor. That's how Earth tests gravity tolerance, ask the question. See who survives the aftermath. Zyrek considered her words. You consider this an aftermath? Kaela shook her head only slightly. Slight meant honest. She pointed a finger, not theatrically, but practically, toward a corridor window showing Earth space, oceans glinting like distant memory. The aftermath was when the broadcast cut before the first question, she said. You restored it manually. Most species call that recovery. Earth calls that Tuesday. The Torlan diplomat snorted behind the sovereign pane, unable to suppress it this time. He whispered to Vern over console. She's not wrong, Vern replied, checking gravity thresholds manually. This whole ring thought humans were profilable. It just learned it wasn't. Kaela continued walking toward her seat for ease of admin phrase only interrogation sessions. The cameras tracked posture variance and gait delta for later Alliance trust metrics only, they recorded mathematics, not narrative. Kaela sat. The question finally asked wasn't neural. It was genuine. Genuine raised stakes higher than any impossible show could. HFY didn't roar here by repetition. It roared by consequence. Kaela passed not because gravity bent around her, but because the tribunal finally did.